Okay, good morning. Thank you so much for being here to talk about what has been a truly profound shift in our understanding of technology and what it can do. We've heard about AI, I think, for years, but especially more recently. It's been an acceleration in the discussion, and it's a new phenomenon. I think we've all heard that it's going to be more profound than fire. I think we've all heard that quote and that term. But we're still learning what that means, especially for such a robust and relationship-intensive industry as commercial real estate. And so as we kind of continue to explore what that means and what it means for each of us in this industry, we have a few experts who are going to help us paint a picture of both the ramifications and the opportunities that AI can bring to commercial real estate. And so I want to introduce them real quick. First, we have Doug Banerjee, Senior Managing Director with Greysteel. We have Connor Hall, Senior Digital Strategy Director with CBRE. We have Veronica Unnikrishnan, Senior Vice President of Product Innovation, Sales, and Marketing with 5Q. And we have Kevin Shtofman, Global Head of Innovation with Cherre. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're excited to kind of hear about the different impacts that AI can have on this industry. I wanted to start with kind of a 5,000-foot view from each of you of how you and your companies are using AI right now. Doug, can we start with you?
Sure. So at Greysteel, I wear a few different hats. I run our multifamily investment sales conventional team, and I also help out with our Texas land sales team and our national affordable housing investment sales practice. At Greysteel, we use Salesforce as our CRM. It's a proprietary database with over 200,000 contacts. So Greysteel utilizes it in a number of ways, the main one being just communicating with those 200,000 contacts. Naturally, we've got about 90 producers on the platform that are reaching out to clients on a daily basis, building relationships, but 90 people can't stay in touch with 200,000. So we use, I believe it's called Einstein AI within Salesforce to just identify who's being communicated with and who's not. And we have bots that are speaking to individuals who have not had any sort of correspondence in 6 months. So that's kind of one of the ways that Greysteel's using AI. And then myself, kind of as an end user, I try to stay active on LinkedIn. So if I'm not connected with anyone here, please reach out. I'm the only Doug Banerjee in the world, that I've found. So pretty easy to find, but try to put unique content out there, and you can, create your little article or piece and rewrite it with AI to see if it can be written better, which, 10 times out of 10 it can be. So I utilize it that way a little bit and then put my own little kind of tweaks on it. And then I'll speak to, in a minute, how some of our clients, who are owners and operators of multifamily assets are using it as well.
Veronica?
So 5Q, we are a firm that is specifically designed for commercial real estate on technology and cybersecurity. So AI, absolutely, not only from the perspective of how we use it, but how also our clients are using it and the impact for them and their assets. In our case, for example, with cybersecurity, we're monitoring the asset, computers, even the elevators and the HVAC and lighting control of your buildings. And so with the Security Operations Center, we actually collect all that information. You can imagine the amount of information and data that we are collecting, and specifically because we are supervising and overseeing everything that is happening with those assets. And so with the amount of data with an analyst, it is very, very slow if there wouldn't be any automation. And even if you have the automation, you need that logic behind what does it mean if this is really an impactful event and this is a real cyber threat, or if this is just something that potentially is a movement of data, but it's normal. So you have to evaluate all that. So with AI, what we're doing is we are actually teaching it what are those positive events that are real and versus which ones are negative, and it's just regular activity of our client. And so what it's doing, it's accelerating not only the speed that we can respond to our clients, but also the volume. So what it's allowing us to do is that our experts and analysts are really inspecting and understanding the data instead of just waiting for the data to come to them. So that is one way that we are implementing it. In the other side, we are using Copilot. So Microsoft came up with all this amazing technology, and there is a step where you need to understand and learn what that means for your organization. So the adoption of all that, you have to teach your people how to actually use it for the benefit of acceleration in the business. So that's what we're doing. We are doing all the testing with our people, and now we're rolling it out. So, yes, AI, very impactful for us. Connie?
Yep. So I'm at CBRE. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with CBRE. My role, I sit at the corporate level, so I'm across all of our businesses, and I really do two things, which are related. The first of which is more of a strategy role, where I'm thinking about trends that are 3 to 5 years out from a digital data or technology perspective, and thinking about how those are going to impact our own businesses and what CBRE should do about it. So that's kind of part one. And then part two is I help manage CBRE's interaction with the external technology ecosystem, but specifically real estate technology or prop tech ecosystems. So I'm constantly looking externally, seeing what companies are popping up, what capabilities are popping up, and I help CBRE make venture capital fund investments, direct investments, and strategic partnerships with companies in the real estate technology ecosystem. So what is CBRE doing on the AI front? The answer is a lot of different stuff across a bunch of our businesses. There's, I would say, 3 maybe marquee things that we're doing that are well publicized externally that I'll start with. And then as we get into the rest of the conversation, maybe I can talk about some of the other things that we're doing. The first of which is we've taken all of the sort of out-of-the-box LLMs, so the GPTs, OpenAI's ChatGPT models and Anthropic's models and Meta's models, et cetera, and have fine-tune them essentially for real estate use cases. And we have enterprise relationships with these companies such that we have sort of a ring-fenced environment that we call CBRE LSAI. It's basically a place where all of CBRE's professionals can go interact with these models in a safe way, where none of our clients or our own confidential data is going to be exposed, which I'm sure we'll get into later as well. And then over time, we're incorporating specific use cases into the LSAI ecosystem as well. The next maybe marquee thing that you'll see if you Google CBRE AI is activity that we're doing in our FM business, mostly around predictive or preventative maintenance, and then some call it building level monitoring and optimization. And then the last area, which we just announced, I think last week or the week before, we have a sort of new capability that we're exposing externally called CBRE Capital AI. And it's a product that's come out of our capital markets business. And it's essentially leveraging machine learning to understand how capital's flowing in and out of different markets, in and out of different property types, and then some intelligence on who probable buyers for a given property might be, or maybe some intelligence on, okay, which of our investor clients would be likely to sell which properties to help inform our brokers upon where to focus for prospecting and the like. But a whole bunch of different stuff, and that's just some of the things that we're doing.
Thank you so much. Kevin?
Sure. Kevin Shtofman, Global Head of Innovation at Cherre. We're a data management platform, real estate focused, property type agnostic, geography agnostic. So we have about $3 trillion in assets in the platform. Most of our clients are pension funds, publicly traded REITs, large ground up developers. And what we do is ingest information from a bunch of different places, right? Data that you own in your accounting system or your CRM like Salesforce, data that you might buy from firms like CBRE, and then data you might get from facilities managers and partners like 5Q. all of that information comes in. We build a standard data model so that you can report internally to executives, externally to LPs or auditors, everything that's happening at every level of your business: facilities management, property management, asset management, fund management, portfolio management. So as you can imagine, data is core to our business, and how we use AI is pretty vast. So maybe just a really quick example of like, what is AI and what is it not? In your example, you said you use Salesforce. So you meet someone here at the breakfast that works for Goldman in their multifamily group. So you enter their name into Salesforce. Automatically, it says, oh, this person is in a table stored with this table that shows all Goldman employees, matches them together. That is not AI. It's RPA. Next, it spins up an article about Goldman launching a new fund in the multifamily space. That's not AI. That's machine learning. And you put a bunch of rules that say every time I add somebody, if there's relevant articles, pull them up. What is AI is if when it releases the article, it says, hey, now that they've launched this new fund, based on data you have in the system, their intent to buy multifamily has changed and has now crossed a threshold. So their intent score is more than 50. Use it, call, reach out. That's AI. We do a bunch of that stuff inside of Cherre, leveraged with other tools. So the example I'll give is you are a new fund manager and you're trying to figure out what markets to invest in next. You might buy a bunch of different data, right? You might get sales comps from CoStar or RCA, rent comps from Dwellsy or CompStack. You might buy proprietary market data from CBRE. And sorry, full disclosure, CBRE is a client. I can't talk about what we're doing together, but just if I mention CBRE a lot, it's because we like them. So you get all this information in, and that data using AI could provide you with two things. One, a health score. How is a market doing today based on net absorption, rental rate increases, vacancies, TIs? And then an opportunity score. It says, well, where's this market actually going? Is it healthy right now and going to get better? Or is it not so great and we think it's going to improve a bunch, so we should be buying land or buildings in that market? That's how Cherre uses AI.
Okay, well, pretty good cross-section. Thank you all for sharing that, and excited to drill down into kind of the more specifics, starting with facilities management. I know that's been a big topic, and wanted to start with talking about how is AI transforming property management in commercial real estate?
So for us, what we are seeing is that there are so many sensors, so much IoT technology that is coming into the buildings, a lot of prop tech, like you mentioned, Connor. And what we're seeing is that our facility managers have not gained the skill on how to deal with that new technology. So now what we're finding is a gap between what a facility manager function is versus what a technologist facility manager should be. And so when you find that gap, you need the help, you need the support. And like Kevin said, when you are ingesting all that information, and now you can do the suggestions and recommendations. For example, if this technology is actually malfunctioning, that it actually auto-detects that it's malfunctioning, that it actually can give you the instructions and the steps of what to do when you need to deal with that problem. Now, that all is generated with AI, and now your facility manager doesn't need to know about that technology. Your facility manager can actually follow the instruction that now the AI engine gave them. So that is an example that is very valuable, and how this intersection is happening at the facility management level.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think facilities management and AI, for the most part, there's a bit of a dependency there, which is the sensorization of the building. So most of what's happening in the facilities management space, the underlying business case there is driven by trying to make operating the asset or the actual facilities management operation more efficient. And so it's generally about either avoiding some downtime in the facility, or if there's something, if there's a technician that needs to go do something at the facility for whatever reason, getting as much done for that truck roll as possible. And so if there's preventative maintenance that can be done, identifying, okay, this guy's going out here anyways, we can reduce another trip out next month if he does these 2 or 3 things. Or leak detections, another big one that's coming up and is intersecting with some of the insurance challenges that the industry is facing. So if you're deploying leak detection sensors, which leverage machine learning, you can reduce your insurance expense and reduce downtime in the facility. So I think I'm sure we'll talk about some of the other things that are happening in the FM space around energy optimization and the like, but I think what's happening in the FM space with AI is directly interconnected to what data is coming out of the building, which is also directly connected to what sensors or systems are in place at the building. And so if you have more data coming out of more connected systems in the building, there's more that you can do with AI. And it's generally driven from a place of trying to be more cost efficient or more sustainable or delivering a better experience for the end users of that facility, whoever they might be.
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, you need to have all that information in one place. Right? You need sensor data plus leasing data plus marketing data plus tenant data all in a place where you can analyze it so you can actually use AI. Secondly, I would probably bifurcate how facilities management within commercial assets, so an office building, an industrial logistics warehouse, or a retail facility is very, very different than like a multi-family building and how we use AI. So in a commercial asset, it's pretty common to say, I am a landlord broker rep and I'm going to schedule a tour for this space on Saturday. But typically on Saturday, the standard process is that, boiler and chiller are turned off to save money because in this age, most people aren't going into the office. So I schedule a tour. If that system is not talking to the system that has the preventative maintenance information, I'm not now going to know that, it's Saturday, we're doing work on the escalators. It's going to be shut down. It's going to be really, really tough to get up to the space on the second floor. And by the way, because the AC unit isn't on and I hadn't already scheduled to turn it on, we're walking into one facility that's a problem. The AI would tell you, hey, I see you scheduled a tour 3 days from now. There's nothing that says the AC should be turned on, and no one's told the preventative maintenance folks working on the escalator. AI, when you connect the data together, can warn you, identify risk in advance of it coming up. In multifamily, I think it's more about what you mentioned about centralization. So now that most owner-operators are buying multiple apartment communities and trying to save money, they will no longer have like a bunch of leasing agents on site at each residential building. So optimizing routes, optimizing preventative maintenance work within all the buildings in a territory, that's where AI is pretty common.
I'll add one thing real quick. So about a month ago, a friend in the CRE business reached out and said, hey, I want you to meet somebody, and went and had coffee, and he was soliciting an investment, right? So this happens a lot, but it was a pretty interesting concept because he said, Doug, you're in multifamily, you have a lot of clients who own buildings, and they have units that need to turn, right? And make readies and everything like that. And it's not a very profitable business, but it's a necessary one, right? Because you have to get in, clean these out. So he said, imagine this, right? I utilize AI. I've taught this GPT, I'm taking a video and I'm speaking as I'm walking through the unit, pointing out there's a hole in the wall, flooring needs to be replaced, we want to upgrade the lighting fixtures, etc. And it already, they've already kind of programmed it to send out automatically bids to 3 vendors for each of the different trades so that, within 24 hours or even by the time they're back at their desk, they have bids in their inbox to go and do that work and schedule it. So it takes a lot of the time off the maintenance person and the manager's hands to get those units made ready so that they can focus on the leasing and the work orders to kind of keep the existing tenants happy. So it was a pretty novel idea that conceptually made a lot of sense to me. So this is kind of at its infancy stages, but I can see, businesses like that evolving pretty quickly here in the next 12 months.
I want to pivot to something that was mentioned a little bit here earlier, which is energy management and sustainability. What role does AI play in that energy management and sustainability on that real estate side?
I think Veronica mentioned, leak detection, right? That's the biggest one in the multifamily space, I would say, whether it's water conservation or certainly leak detection, and just kind of having those systems in place to when, a spike occurs, so that you can react and get that fixed immediately and not lose thousands of dollars waiting for your next bill. So that's the one that kind of comes to mind for multifamily off the bat.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say on the office and probably industrial sides, the big ones, actual energy usage. So in multifamily, that's pushed down to the tenants and whatever other. There's other examples of that as well, obviously. But similar examples to actually what Kevin had spoken about, where you're pulling in occupancy information or space utilization information and understanding how to more intelligently run your HVAC systems, because generally the HVAC's the number one consumer of energy at a given site. And so not having the entire system running through the entire night or during weekends or off times creates a ton of energy efficiency savings. But it's not quite that simple, to Kevin's earlier point. So you need to be pulling in other information from other systems and information about what's happening outside, right? So you need to know, okay, what's the temperature right now? What's the temperature going to be in 2 hours? So I know if I kick on, let's say it's 5 a.m., I know people tend to come into this office at 7:30. What time do I need to kick on the HVAC system such that it's not 80 degrees in this office when people actually start coming in here? And so you need to understand what's temperature now, what's temperature going to be at 7:30, what's the temperature going to be at 9 a.m., and what action does my HVAC system need to take in order to make sure it's a comfortable temperature at that time. So all of that calculus is managed by what we call their HVAC optimization algorithms. And so it's pulling all of this data from all of these different things together and making sure that the HVAC system is being run in the most energy and cost-efficient manner, but also ensuring that it remains a comfortable environment for, in this case, the office workers who are going to be in the site. But that's the big one we see. And then there are other examples on the energy side as well, like grid optimization, or a big thing that we've seen is EV charging deployments. That's been a massive area of business for us over the last couple of years. Well, these EV chargers they require a ton of energy. And so you have to be really intelligently managing the energy load from the grid, the energy load to the building, the energy load to these EV chargers, and making sure that basically everything's working well together and is well orchestrated. And if you have an on-site battery, for example, which is another thing that's becoming more and more common, you can draw power from the grid at times when energy prices are lower, or when there's less demand on the grid, and create cost efficiencies that way as well. And then there are other examples of that where you have solar installations and you can choose times to draw that solar power or potentially sell it back to the grid. So that's the other thing on the energy front that we're seeing quite a bit of activity in.
So, sorry again. So if you have heard a little bit, multifamily, office, all this technology coming together so we can do better in understanding what is happening in our buildings. Well, it turns out that all this technology is actually connected. And when we mean connected, it's also connected to the internet. And so, for example, the EVs. The EVs can be installed. Wonderful. Let's go ahead and set them up in multifamily, in industrial, office. Well, it turns out that the EVs are actually connected to the internet, and the internet, if you don't take care of those steps where you are actually looking for protecting that internet connection, well, the bad guys are actually using AI too. And so what is happening there is that without you knowing, you're actually connecting a point to your buildings or your facilities where the attackers through the internet can get to your EV systems, and then can collect also the data that those EV systems is actually getting, like credit card information from your clients or the tenant information, etc. So when we're thinking about all this connectivity that we are creating in the buildings, which is absolutely wonderful when we're thinking about what are we going to do with the ecosystem itself for the buildings and the multifamily, for example. What we really need to think about is also how are we installing it and how we are connecting it in such a way that we are not opening the doors now to, the bad actors that might be now monitoring that equipment when before your buildings didn't have it. So the safety and security of those buildings now has turned into something else.
Every time we talk about this stuff, my blood
yeah.
20 point. We want to just add a little more context to the example you give about the office building to further complicate it. But oftentimes these are like triple net buildings and leases. So as a landlord, you don't actually access to the data of the energy usage because your tenants are paying the bill. And they don't really care to spend the time and effort to send you all that information because they're paying the bill. So at a micro level, it can be a little complicated to optimize energy management, which is hopefully why a property management firm would get access to that information because there will be some sort of cost sharing segment. But at a macro level, you can absolutely use AI to say, well, what are, for better or for worse, the government incentives to certain, energy efficiency products, or the government-induced penalties for a building being inefficient, depending upon the region that you sit in the United States. Right? In New York, there's local law 97. Certain buildings of a certain age and certain size, if their energy efficiency gets C grade or lower, you start incurring penalties. So as landlords think about when to upgrade infrastructure, boilers, chillers, when to add solar on the rooftop of an industrial warehouse, right? Having all that information in place can tell you which of these products or projects spread across your portfolio are going to deliver the best ROI, at least in the shortest period of time. So as you're weighing where your capital expenditures need to go, AI can make you a lot more efficient with.
Before we move on to investment strategies, I wanted to make sure that we touched on how can AI be used to streamline lease administration and management?
Yeah, I can comment. I think the biggest opportunities, and it's been around for a while, it's sort of accelerated once again with this latest push around generative AI, but it's something called lease abstraction or document abstraction. So you can basically extract all the key data points out of a lease or out of amendments to those leases, put them in a database, just like a human lease abstractor would today for the purposes of lease administration. And so it can take whatever tens to hundreds of hours to manually abstract the lease and call it the old way. And with some of the abstraction capabilities that are coming out now, you can really accurately extract pretty much any data point you would want from a lease in a matter of a couple of minutes. And for the foreseeable future, you'll still want humans to look at the results and make sure they're accurate. But I would say there's been a bit of a step function change in the accuracy of the systems that we see coming out now versus maybe some of the systems that were in place a few years ago. But once you have that data extracted from the leases or the amendments or whatever into a underlying database, then you can apply either business rules or different machine learning models to that data set to create action based on certain circumstances. So I'd say the big thing is extracting data from leases or other documents to facilitate lease administration. I'd say is the bulk of the activity that we see.
I think this is another example where I separated in a commercial versus multifamily. In a commercial lease, very large document, very defined terms, companies are going to have public credit ratings, so you can know their ability to pay. Where AI often gets used is around aged receivables. So if a tenant has been paying on time at the same time, net 30 every month, and then payments start to slip. So you look at the data, it's like, no, they're still paying. They're still a current tenant, but they paid 3 days late last month, 5 days late this month, 7 days late the next month scheduled. There's some risk there, and you should proactively reach out to the tenant to understand what's going on. AI can be used there. In multifamily, I'm sure Doug can talk a lot about this. We've seen a big uptick in fraud, right? There's good things about AI and there's bad things about AI. The bad things about AI is now a lot of people can create fake personal financial statements, fake bank statements, fake IDs. So now they're applying for a multifamily lease without ever intending to pay. And they're picking certain markets where there's a lot of tenant protections and you can just stay in that apartment for 3 or maybe even 6 months before you can be evicted. So AI is being used to try to prevent that from happening by understanding what might look like a fake ID or help run a background check before a tenant is moving in.
Now, what we have seen is that the AI engine will be prepared to consume your data and analyze it and do their magic. But what you need to do to prepare for that is step number 1, know what you have. Know what you have in your assets, in your buildings, a complete inventory. And in some cases, for you to gain all that operational efficiency, you need to start with, what do I have? Do I have it standardized? And with that inventory and all that collection of information, that you have it clean. Because if you don't, then the engine might take some assumptions, but they're not complete because part of the information is not there, or part of the information is not standardized, or part of the information is not clean. So what it's very important is, before we put the engine to work, let's go ahead and start with the basics of going, collecting, knowing what you have, and then from there, enable all your tools.
Doug, I wanted to ask a little bit if you could give us a window into the brokerage side of things and how AI is impacting that. Can you speak a little bit to that, and whoever else can?
Sure. So I got in this business. I'm coming up on my 13-year anniversary, selling multifamily. And I remember back 13 years ago, I would take a trailing 12-month profit and loss statement, rent roll, and I would personally analyze it for about 2 hours, right? I would look at every unit and I would look at every GL code on the income and expense line item. And I really knew that asset well. But it took a lot of time, right? I was my own analyst. Now we use an underwriting software and have probably for the last 10 years called Red IQ, where we can load the T12 and the rent roll. It'll automatically, categorize through an algorithm those 100 GL codes based off of updates that had previously been done, that had the same GL code or the same naming convention. And so that can be done by our financial analysts and spit out a model in probably 20 or 30 minutes. And then taking it a step further, this is just one example that some of my clients, and I've seen a demo in 2022 before I even knew what AI was. And frankly, I don't even know if I know exactly what AI is, but it's called Archer. And so it's a multifamily underwriting tool in 2022. There were a lot of things. We had a lot of questions. Well, and so what the tool's for, it kind of does 2 things, right? You can do what I just described. You can upload a rent roll, a T12, and it'll spit out a model in a matter of minutes. You can also put in criteria, right? So if you're exploring new markets and your investment committee or you as an investor, what's important to you? Is it area median income? Is it population growth? Is it crime, et cetera? You can put in all that criteria and then it'll spit out and score because it's pulling in information from a bunch of different sources to kind of score and categorize those different markets. So it can help you pinpoint your top 5 or 10 markets that you want to invest in multifamily. So it does all those things. The thing that I think is still questionable, somebody on the panel had kind of mentioned, you got to verify the data, right? So Texas, I feel, as a broker, my job is somewhat comfortable, but at least for a little bit, because it's a non-disclosure state. So the data as far as sales numbers is not readily available. right? If you're not the broker on the deal, you're not the seller, the buyer, the lender, or the title company that's involved in the transaction, it's very hard to find out what the exact sale price was. So if you're just trusting CoStar or another source for that data, because a lot of times they're just guessing. They're applying a loan to value on whatever loan was put on the property, and let's say it was a $25 million loan. They're guessing it's $33 million at a 75% loan to value. Well, it didn't sell for that, right? So garbage in is going to spit garbage out. So that's the thing that I would say, unless the data is readily available and very accurate, you got to be careful kind of on what the outputs are giving you. But Archer, I think in that 1 year, I had a demo in 22 to 23, I can see significant improvements, and now it's 24. So it's probably time for another demo to see how far they've come along. And I'm sure there's other examples out there competing with them.
Yeah, I think Doug's point about data availability is really key, and key kind of across any use case for AI. And maybe going back to some of the commentary that Kevin's made, it really depends by property type. And in commercial, multifamily is actually the property type with the most data transparency or data availability. Other property types have far less, maybe with the exception of land. And so how far down maybe within the brokerage or the broker journey in particular, AI is going to be able to go in the short term does depend on property type and does depend on how available that data is. I think where we'll see AI impact the brokerage business more directly over the next few years is at the front end of the funnel. It's around prospecting and around client intelligence and bringing the intelligence to bear that an organization like CBRE in the past might have spent a ton of human capital on educating our brokers on a specific client, right? So you can imagine there's a big client opportunity. So the value of that opportunity to CBRE is really high. Historically, we would have invested a ton of resources into doing research on that client and that opportunity and building a research packet to arm our brokers with. Over time, AI will allow us to do more of that for the long tail of clients. So you remove a lot of, or maybe all of the human capital component of the equation to arming our brokers with as much intelligence about a given prospect or a given client as possible, such that, so today our brokers know, let's call it Blackstone's on the capital markets side, Blackstone's portfolio like the back of their hand. Well, the owner 684 in Dallas who owns a small multifamily portfolio, it's just not possible for them to have that level of insight about that owner's portfolio or about the owner themselves, what their interests are, what their kids might do to build a deeper relationship with them. And over time, I think we'll be arming our brokers with that intelligence that's often either developed by AI or that is pulling data that CBRE may have proprietary access to arm our brokers with as much information as possible to have as intelligent of a conversation with a client or potential client as possible. So that's where I think call it in the next 2 or 3 years, the brokerage ecosystem will probably see the most interaction with and value created from AI is at prospecting, what I call prospecting and client intelligence.
Well, I think that's a great place to kind of stop. And there's so much to cover in so little time, which is always a bummer. But I did want to make sure we were able to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. So I believe we have a chance for a Q&A opportunity.
Hi, thank you. This is very helpful. Allison Yost, Collier's industrial tenant rep. Question for you guys is, there's obviously a cost to all of this. And with ESG, we're already seeing developers have the argument between the developer and the lender on how much ESG to put in, how is it capitalized, how it's amortized. This is sort of a sweet tie-in. And I laugh because during COVID in Europe, there was a mall that the people did not know how to turn off the lights or the HVAC, so it ran for over 2 years during COVID. This obviously could have helped But where's the cost in all of this, and what's the long term to where we already have taxes going up? This is obviously how it's capitalized. What are we talking about for a cost perspective? And I know industrial is very different than multifamily and office. But as a tenant rep coming in, I'm thinking, okay, my costs are now going to go up if we do that. So,
sorry, you say the cost of ESG or just the cost?
Sorry. So for when you were talking about putting all of these systems together to speak,
sure,
that there's obviously a cost to that, as beneficial as it is. Where are we thinking in the long term of are we 10 years, 15 years? What's the initial cost? If you could talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah, like any new technology, cost goes down very precipitously, very fast. So if you wanted to build your own data warehouse 10 years ago, probably cost $2-3 million. Today it's $50,000. So any new technology is going to be very expensive up front. And of course, because this is our business model, we would like you to leverage Cherre to integrate all of the data from all of your systems to get value from it. So your question is like, well, where's the cost? Well, one, there's developing all the pipelines to bring all of the information together. There is all of the validation rules you're going to put in to make sure that the data is clean and it's standard. And then after that, there's whatever models you're going to build on top to do scenario analysis or forecasting. And so as you think about your business, I think you said you're at Colliers, which data sets are going to help you find deals faster, right? That could be a place to start. Which data sets would help you cut costs in a building to be more efficient property management? That could be a place to start. These costs today are 5 figures on connecting data, and probably, depending on the number of data sets you have, could be 6 or even 7 figures to buy the actual underlying data. If it's not your own proprietary information, it could be very expensive if the footprint's big.
Yeah, I think another sort of key component here is what building systems are in place. And so how maybe modern of a BMS do you have in the building, and what other building system does it have control over? And the example that you spoke to, right? You probably need some occupancy sensors deployed in there to know if there are people in the space. And so if not, you can turn out the lights, right? And does the BMS in that building have control over the lighting in that space? If yes, it's a relatively easy thing to do, honestly, like a system to exercise that level of control or to run that analysis from these different building systems probably isn't particularly expensive today. But if you need to deploy new hardware at the site to enable that, it can get pretty expensive is the short of it. But just software, like assuming you have modern hardware and all of the appropriate systems in place to exercise that control, there are probably companies out there that would do it for, probably 5 figures a year, like software subscription is the sort of thing that you'd be looking at. I think the big service providers will start incorporating this sort of an offering into our property management and facilities management offerings sort of by default over time, and that cost will just be absorbed by the services that we provide, would be my expectation on how this.
And in that example, like they're going to run an analysis if it's cheaper to rip and replace with new hardware and software that talks to each other, or whether they you just introduce new sensors that actually don't require any ripping and replacing. It's really more of a retrofit by Bluetooth and Wi-Fi only.
What we are seeing is that before you think about a solution like so advanced technologically, the question would be, what is the problem you want to solve? Because yes, all this sounds really exciting, but maybe you need to start first with identifying what is the issue, what do you want to solve for, what are the costs that you are facing right now because of that problem, what solutions are right now in place so you can evaluate them. And just like we do when we hire FTE and we do the evaluation and we actually put guidelines around what is it going to do and why do we need it? Same thing, same concept. Because what we are seeing is that, for example, in our side, when I talked about the Security Operations Center, what we are looking at is the moment that we need an additional person to come in and help us, instead of hiring, we're looking at the investment into AI. Because what is happening is that with that initial investment, what is going to allow us is to continue growing and scaling without additional cost in the future. So yes, there is an initial investment, but then evaluate what's it going to do for you future-wise. So that's how we're doing the evaluation and the cost analysis on our side.
I think we have a question in the back.
Yeah, so my question's around data. CBRE, obviously, you mentioned CBRE has internal AI things that they don't want to make public that they're working on. Kevin and Veronica, you guys both work with a variety of clients. How, I guess it's kind of two parts. Starting off, how are your clients wanting to keep their data segregated and internal exclusive versus it being kind of open and shared with other potential clients or general public? And then how do you see going forward various groups that are trying to use AI weighing the security measures of keeping their data internal versus the benefit that has been talked about where the more data you have, the better the AI can get? So having kind of open and shared data, like how do you weigh the risk and reward that come with that?
Yeah, so maybe I'll go first. So we actually, a few years ago now, basically we brought a bunch of lawyers in to review all of our data and all of our client agreements and figure out, okay, what can we use, what can't we use as far as data that's generated by the business activities that we're doing. I would say we will never aggregate or use any of our clients' data that we don't explicitly have the right to use. So I'd say CBRE, we're quite conservative in that respect. So we want to be really, really sure that we're allowed to use the data in the ways that we want to use it before we'll use it for anything. So certainly not something we would push the boundaries on. And if a client ever expressed to CBRE, hey, I don't want my data used for anything other than what I'm sharing it with you for, we would definitely honor that request. It would not use their data for anything. I do think, and so that aside, even putting that challenge aside, we have just by virtue of our size and how long we've been operating and the scale of our operations, we have very sizable proprietary data sets. And we do think over time that will be an advantage for us and probably a more pronounced advantage for us as many of these AI capabilities are more commoditized. What won't be commoditized is the private data that very few people have access to. And so your point on how do you weigh the trade-offs of exposing certain things externally versus keeping internally and creating an advantage from that, I think that's honestly going to be one of the core business strategy questions that emerge over the next 5 to 10 years for literally every company, is because I think AI is going to be so prevalent, and that's maybe any given business's most valuable asset now is the proprietary data that they have. And it's an ever-shrinking world as well. Like what data sets are proprietary versus publicly accessible is it's getting smaller and smaller, but not sure if that answered the question.
We think of it as like a data pyramid. So the bottom most foundational layer is going to be data that everyone has access to because it's publicly available. Right? This is county tax assessor information. This is GSA information. And the reason it's important as a foundation is because you have publicly recognized and legal address, parcel boundary, lat long information. And in our case, in our platform, we have a knowledge graph on top, so you know who the owner of the property. Then on top of that, you're going to have data that you can buy, right? So information that would come from a third-party data provider that they allow you to mix with public data. to then build a new model. That's typically where the standardization stops. After that, it's going to depend on associations you're part of. So if you're part of IREM, or if TREC members came together and combined data, there's going to be different associations that might choose to share subsets of information amongst members and members only to build smarter models. And then at the very top of that pyramid is going to be your own proprietary information that, quite frankly, I couldn't predict when the ROI would flip to it be worth sharing that data. It might never be. So that the top of that pyramid, that is where all the interesting custom models of AI will get built, because you're comparing your actuals with the benchmark, your underwriting to the comps that are out there. So you combine public data plus data that you buy plus your own data, gives you this optimal mix for deal identification, risk underwriting, portfolio optimization, and then once you sold it, capital raise.
Yeah, and I think the value is not necessarily limited to the data itself.
Yeah.
It's like the models that will be built using this data. And so it's not even necessarily a question about, okay, do I share the underlying data? It's a question of, do I expose these models to different people, right? And so I think the models that are built or that will be built are maybe the core competitive advantage that a lot of, at least the big companies in the ecosystem, will try to create.
We have a question back here. Was that it? Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. And again, so much to cover in so little time, but we appreciate you all for being here to answer our questions.